In about 4 minutes.
All right, we should be streaming to YouTube. Alyssa, just check that out for me, and I'll be back in 2 minutes. Okay, we should be.
Really happy to see people coming on. We're about 2 minutes from starting, and if you're signing on from wherever you are, maybe put in the chat where you're coming in from, and that would be fun for people to see. So welcome, everyone. Upstate New York, Missoula, Montana, Lee, Massachusetts. Very fun. Lancaster, Pennsylvania, North Carolina.
That's my mom.
You have a wonderful daughter.
Salisbury, Connecticut, Hamilton, New Jersey. How fun. Ontario, Bowmanville, locked down in DC. And I hope I can pronounce this right. Saxapahaw, North Carolina. Is that right, April? New York City. Wonderful audience today. Glad I could get April's hometown.
You're good to go, Mary.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. We are so glad you are with us today to honor the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. My name is Mary Burley, and I'm the Chief Educator at the Norman Rockwell Museum. We are here today with artists Keely Rose O'Gorman and Bria Goeller. My colleagues, Rich Bradway, Stephanie Plunkett, and Alyssa Stubble are on as well, supporting. Dr. King, through nonviolence and civil disobedience, successfully protested racial discrimination in federal and state law. He led marches for the right to vote, workers' rights, and civil rights. While we know there is so much more to do, Dr. King's life is a source of inspiration. And at the Norman Rockwell Museum, we recognize the importance of learning history to inform us as we work to shape a better and more equitable future together. We also recognize the power and influence of youth. Dr. King gave his I Have a Dream speech at age 32. Ruby Bridges, who we will learn about today, was 6 years old when she bravely integrated her new school. The artists with us today are young people making a difference. Keely Rose O'Gorman is a singer and actress making her national debut with the Norman Rockwell Museum virtual field trip of the Imagining Freedom exhibition later this year. Artist Bria Goeller created the meme of Vice President-elect Kamala Harris casting Ruby Bridges' shadow. It went viral nationally. So we'll see a little bit of Keely and Bria's work a little later. But we'll start with Keely Rose reading Ruby Head High, the story of Ruby Bridges. After the book, we'll look at Norman Rockwell's image, The Problem We All Live With, which also tells the story. And we will have plenty of time for conversation and questions. So with that, Keely, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here, and I will be reading out loud this amazing book called Ruby Head High, Ruby Bridges' First Day of School by Irene Cohen-Janca and Marc Daniau. The painting of the little black girl in the white dress was on the easel when we entered the classroom. Our teacher asked us what we thought of it. Louise immediately raised her hand. She has rich parents. They are afraid she will be kidnapped, so she is protected by the police. I think she made a mistake and they are taking her to prison, Nadia said. Lucien had another idea. She does not want to go to school, so the police are forcing her to go. We all laughed because we knew Lucien hated school and that he preferred to hang out on the street. The teacher asked for calm, then she asked me, "What do you think, Nora?" I was sure the adults around her were there to protect her from danger, but I was too shy to say what I thought. I thought about the little girl in the painting all day, and that night I dreamed of her. She told me her story. My name is Ruby Bridges. I grew up in Louisiana, a state of fantastic alligator-filled swamps, deep dark forests, tropical flowers, and lots of birds. The Mississippi River flows, mighty and terrible, quiet as a stream, and cities rise from where swamps used to be. Louisiana is also a state where Black people are kept separate from white people. This is called segregation. 1960. It took a lot of time and trouble before things started to change. New laws banned segregation. Still, many whites refused to live with Blacks. Only white children were allowed to go to the neighborhood school. My school was very far from home. It was 1960 and I was 6 years old. We did not have a lot of money, but we had a lot of joy. My mom loved to cook rice and catfish, banana pudding, cake, so many good things that scented the whole house. After school, I played knucklebones with my friends, skipped rope, and climbed trees. In the summer, a band of us, my brothers and sisters and many cousins, all went to my grandparents' farm. We didn't have much time to wander or get bored. We had to harvest and can vegetables. In the evenings, we fell into bed exhausted. I was a happy girl. And then everything changed. One day, there was a loud knock at the door. People who had been fighting for equal rights told my parents that Black children had the right to attend white schools. They just needed to pass an exam. My father shut the door. He did not believe there could ever be equality. But my mother believed in fighting. She convinced my father to let me take the exam. More than 100 children took the test. Only 6 girls passed. I was one of them. At church, we prayed for courage and strength. I did not understand why it took courage and strength to go to a new school. All I knew is that I would miss my friends. On the first day of school, I put on my best dress and my mother carefully braided my hair. 4 police officers waited outside our house. They told us they would take us. A large crowd was gathered outside William Frantz Public School. The din of the sirens and shouts reminded me of Mardi Gras, but this was no carnival. My mother and I waited all day in the school office. A big clock hung on the wall. All day, angry white parents came and left with their children. At 3 o'clock, we were told to leave. Outside, the crowd had grown even bigger. Perhaps people waved signs and children chanted rhymes. 2468, we don't want to integrate. 8642, we don't want a chigaroo. One woman held a small coffin with a black baby doll in it, and that scared me more than anything. I did not understand what was happening. The next day, when I arrived at school, the crowd was even bigger. Women with hateful faces screamed that they wanted to poison me. A smiling white woman was waiting for me. She took my hand and opened the door of a quiet classroom and told me to take a seat. There were rows of desks and chairs, but no other children. It was just she and I. Her name was Mrs. Henry, my new teacher. I loved her immediately. I learned to read and write. I discovered mathematics, history, geography. Slowly, the other children returned to school, but they went to separate classrooms. I could hear their laughter and screams. One day, a little girl waved to me. I imagined playing knucklebones, jumping rope, climbing trees with her, but not today. Tomorrow, maybe. Anger rumbled through the city. Riots erupted and fires were lit to scare us. My grandparents lost their land they were renting, their farm. My father was fired from his job. I didn't feel like eating anymore, not even my mother's rice and catfish, not even cake. At night, instead of dreams, I had nightmares. My mother told me to pray even harder. It was hard, but we were not alone. All of our neighbors checked on us. They protected us, and we received letters of support from all over the country. One letter made my mother cry. It was from Mrs. Eisenhower, the wife of the former president of the United States. The letters reminded us that we were courageous and that we were not alone. The next day, I stopped in front of the angry crowd. I was not afraid. Later, Mrs. Henry asked me what I said to them. I prayed. Mrs. Henry smiled. I never forgot that smile. In time, the angry crowd grew smaller. I was finally allowed to join the rest of the children at recess. I asked the little boy if I could play with him. He said no. His mother told him that he could not play with me because I was black. Only he used another word. And that's when I understood why people were so angry at a little girl going to school. I was black. But by the next school year, the police and the crowds were gone. Instead, there were lots of children, white and black. When I entered the classroom, a new teacher was waiting for us. "Where is Mrs. Henry?" I asked. Nobody answered me. My heart was broken. I had lost my teacher and my friend, and it was as if nothing had happened. But I would never be the same. From that day forward, I would not only fight to go to school, I would fight for an education. I would fight for all Black children to have the same opportunities as white children. I would hold my head high. I am Ruby Bridges. I would never be the same either. That night, I dreamed of Ruby Bridges. I dreamed of the painting my teacher shared at school, a little black girl in a white dress walking to school surrounded by federal marshals and angry protesters, but not alone. Ruby no longer walked alone. I was right beside her, and instead of a sad gray wall, ugly words, and red stains, we were surrounded by beautiful trees, singing birds, a blue sky. Ruby, head high, and I.
Beautifully read, Keely. And of course, here is the image, The Problem We All Live With, which the book is based upon, and which is based on Ruby's story. Stephanie, do you want to say a little bit about how Norman Rockwell came to make this painting and
Absolutely.
its place and time? Thank you.
Yes, be happy to. Keely, what a beautiful reading. Thank you. This is a very important painting in many ways. Some of you may know that Norman Rockwell was associated for 47 years with the Saturday Evening Post, which was a very popular American magazine. It was a general magazine, essentially reaching millions of people with every issue. But in the 1960s, Rockwell began to have the feeling that he wanted very much to focus on social issues. And he knew that as a popular illustrator, he had a lot of influence with the public, people who really trusted him and believed in his work. So he decided to move to a different magazine called Look Magazine. And that was a publication that dealt with contemporary events. And The Problem We All Live With, which you see here, was his very first illustration for that magazine. And he decided to work with them to produce an illustration that would commemorate the 10th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court ruling. And that was the ruling that essentially said that separate is not equal in America's public schools. And he was inspired by the example of Ruby Bridges in 1960, walking very proudly to school, surrounded by 4 US Marshals who did escort her every single day for an entire year. But if you look at the painting, maybe some of you will put in the chat what you observe. What's the focus of our attention here? He is absolutely wanting us to see the proud young lady who is making her way into school. And of course, we don't see the heads of the US Marshals. They really were symbolic of what was going on at the time. And we are very fortunate to have that original painting as part of the Norman Rockwell Museum's collection. In fact, it is the first artwork that the museum actually purchased to be part of its collection, aside from many works that Norman Rockwell originally gave us. And it remains one of the most important. It's actually on view right now as part of our Four Freedoms exhibition, but it's often on view because it's such a meaningful work. And I'll just say that we had the great pleasure of visiting with Ruby Bridges in New Orleans not too long ago, a couple of years ago, to interview her. And if you want to hear her story in her own words, it's quite moving. And that is on the Norman Rockwell Museum website. So you'll be able to find it there. I'll just add one more note. Interestingly, Ruby herself was not fully aware of this painting until she was about 19 years old. And then I think the visual actually had a great impact on her in terms of her personal understanding of how important what she and her family had done was. So I'll leave it with that and move on to the rest of our wonderful speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Now we're going to go to a short video of Keely actually in front of the actual image and singing, and then we'll talk about the book and the painting. So Rich, do we have Keely's?
Here's a poem by Langston Hughes. The president's 4 freedoms appeal to me. I would like to see those freedoms come to be. If you believe in the 4 freedoms too, then share them with me. Don't keep them all for you. Looks like by now folks ought to know it's hard to beat Hitler protecting Jim Crow. Freedom's not just to be won over there. It means freedom at home too. Now, right here.
Good of Langston Hughes to point out the freedom was not for everyone. That poem reminds me of a song that expresses how freedom should be given to everyone. I'm bringing a song of freedom to all people wherever they may be. Free to speak and free to hear, free from want, free from fear. Sons of freedom, far and near, who agree, sing with me, for all God's children shall be free. This image I've noticed is a lot different than other pictures of Norman Rockwell, because earlier in his pictures for the Post, he focused really on white America.
It was quite extraordinary that he left the Post and very intentionally went to Look magazine, where he had the editorial control to create images about humanitarian needs, about equity, about the civil rights movement, and really showed his allyship and his leadership during that time.
Wow, that's really incredible. And this all makes me want to sing a song by Nina Simone.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love your voice, Keely.
I wish I could know how it feels to be free. I wish I could break all the chains holding me. I wish I could say all the things that I should say. Say 'em loud, say 'em clear, for the whole round world to hear.
So I think thank you so much, Keely. It is just so inspiring to hear you sing, and especially in front of the image, the problem we all live with. So this time, I think we're going to take questions from the audience about the book or the story. So if anybody out there has questions for Keely or about this story. Oh, and Emily is saying, Keely, you have a lovely voice. You made me cry.
Thank you.
I'm with Emily. So if there are no questions right now, we'll move on to look at Bria's image. And then Keely, I know you have some questions and for Bria. I see there is one question which is asking who is the illustrator? It's Marc Daniau, D-A-N-I-A-U, and the author of Ruby Head High was Irene Cohen-Janca. So I think, Rich, if we want to screen share, we can go right to Bria's image and the interview.
What does it mean to walk in someone else's shoes? What does it look like to fight for who you are? Maybe it's in the tilt of a chin or the strength of a stride, the clothes that you wear or the way you carry your shoulders. Maybe it's in remembering who came before you and what their shoulders carried, who made it possible for you to walk the way you do. What did you think was impossible? What would it look like to visualize that now? What would your dream look like as a piece of art? Tracing a shadow underneath a shoe, drawing connections, responding to a moment with a picture, or maybe 1,000 words? What kind of artist are you? What's your medium? How do you respond? And what are your moments? Who do you look up to? Do you look behind? Maybe there's someone you're leading, a future that you help inspire. What does this moment mean to you?
And here we have Bria's image of Kamala Harris with Ruby Bridges' shadow. Bria, do you want to take a minute to tell us a little bit about your process? And then I'm going to turn it over to Keely to answer additional questions or to ask.
Yeah, sure. Of course. Yeah, so I am an artist in a lot of aspects, but in all of them, I work to be an advocate and a loudspeaker, I think, a visual loudspeaker. This image, my client came to me in good trouble with the idea for this image, and it struck me because I work really hard to find ways for women and people of color to have a voice, and I think that confidence is what will help us create the world we all deserve. And I think images are really, really important and powerful, and representation matters. And so I was, I responded to that call and traced the shadow, obviously, and then and recreated the image of Kamala and put them side by side to sort of show that none of us are ever walking alone, and the things that we do are always influence people down the road, and sometimes make it easier and better, or even just more powerful, the things that people do in tandem with everyone else. Keely, you can ask questions now.
It's so perfect for the time.
Great. So I love this image. I remember when my mom showed it to me just around the election. I thought it really represented where we are now. And so I was asking people that I know some questions. And one of them was, how did you learn about Norman Rockwell and Ruby Bridges, and like ultimately you deciding to use that as a reference for your image?
Yeah, it's funny because the beginning of that book really, I also grew up in Louisiana, and the swamps and all of that struck a little chord in my heart. But I don't know if it's like a story that everyone knows, or if Norman Rockwell is something that everyone knows. But I definitely, and obviously I'm an artist, and I had art classes my whole life, so maybe I was shown in that way, but or maybe it was just where I was, but. Yeah, all of those things I'm sure contributed, but I definitely knew about Ruby Bridges from the get-go. And I think Rockwell's painting is what everyone associates with her, even if she didn't know about it until she was 19. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's super cool how you're from Louisiana and like know about it as well, because I grew up in the Berkshires, and I'm still in the Berkshires where Norman Rockwell lived. So he's like a local celebrity, even like more than just a national wide artist. So
yeah,
finding that connection was cool. So you're an artist, obviously. So another question we had was like, what's your background in art? Did it take you a while to like find out that you wanted to do this, or did you go to college for art? Or
yeah, so I definitely always knew I wanted to be an artist. I don't think I always knew that I was going to be an artist like for my job, because everyone will tell you that that's impossible. I didn't go to school for art. I actually went to a school that had an interdisciplinary program, and so I majored in art and social justice, and it was more of a sort of activism-based art practice. And I took less art classes than I did just learn about. It was in Atlanta, so I learned about the issues there, and really engaged in a lot of like graphic art, which is really powerful, and especially for like companies and nonprofits and places that are trying to empower these populations that really need it. They often need like website design and logo and graphic stuff. So I did that in college, and just on my own on the side did visual art. But I definitely, my mom keeps reminding me, she's like, you had art your entire life. And that's probably why you got where you are, because my school did a really good job when I was little of integrating art into education. And so that was something that I also fought for. I ended up writing my undergraduate thesis on the importance of art in education, not art itself. And so, and using that as like a doorway to empathy, and especially in this time and in this moment, because all moments need it, but like particularly grounded when I graduated of like the interconnectedness of our societies, but the increasing disconnection with social media and with race relations and with all of these just like conflicting ideas and opinions, and how they like jive and don't jive with our lifestyles. And so I was arguing for art as a way to bring people together and make it easier to tell stories and strike the emotions that I think ultimately are what is responsible for change. So yeah, I had some training in art for sure when I was younger, but I think recently I've been just kind of going at it on my own and trying to make it work. And yeah.
Well, it is working, and it's cool that you can do like something that you obviously enjoy doing, but making an impact on people beyond just yourself or who's looking at your art. So that goes into the next question, which is like, are you strictly inspired by political or social justice art? And like, how does that work differently than maybe someone who does scenery or something?
Yeah, I think yes and no. I think that the personal is always political, is what I say, and or what I mean. I'm not the first person to say that, but there's something to be said for the personal struggles that you have and the struggles in connecting with others, whether that's an individual or a group or someone different from you or someone similar to you. So a lot of the work that I do is around the like connection and disconnection, but in like very tangible physical ways, because I like to represent it in like terms of the body. And so I think a lot of that goes into what I was saying about storytelling and connection and empathy, which is very much a political thing, because that's kind of what we all need. And a lot of the work that I do is also around like gender specifically, and race relations and some things that I think are really important right now. But it all sort of comes back to the idea of what are we doing to connect? Like, what are the challenges in that? What are the consequences of that? And how do we do it easier? And for me, it's art is my way of sort of showing that and representing it in a visual way that's powerful, so that people can relate to it and connect with me and connect with what I'm saying and the stories that I'm telling. I usually tell stories behind the art that I share. So on Instagram specifically, which is a nice way to sort of connect it back to sort of the narrative behind it.
So this particular image that we're looking at of yours, is it graphic art? Like, how did you create it?
Yeah. A lot of people think that it's a painting. I made it in Photoshop. It's a digital art actually. But I like drew the shadow and like it made a composite of Kamala. Actually, those aren't it, like there's no picture that just has her like that. I use like her head's from a certain spot, like her body's from a certain spot, her feet are different. So it's yeah. So and then the background I altered from another image too. So I just kind of combined all the images. And obviously with Photoshop, there's a lot of painting too. It's just like on the computer. So I have my little tablet and like a pen and I was, painting the edges and touching it up here and there. But
Well, I think you
yeah,
did a really good job of like combining both of them. My cousin is working in graphic art design, so it's interesting to see how it's so
perfect. Yeah.
you can do so many things with it. I don't know if this may be a question for Mary, but there's some questions in the chat. Can I ask that too?
Oh, please.
Okay.
They're great questions.
So Jason asked Bria, how can we find more about your work?
Oh, I have a website. It's briagoeller.com. It's just my name.com. That's probably the easiest way.
And speaking of work, another question I have for you is, are you working on anything now?
Always. Yeah, I'm always working on 1,000 things at once. I have a lot of other clients that I'm also really, really inspired by and dedicated to their messages. So I'm obviously working for them, doing a lot of graphic design and website and logo branding stuff for them. But in my personal art practice, which I think is probably what they meant, is I've been recently, this is so weird, but I've been recently going to thrift shops and buying frames and like taking out whatever's behind it and just painting on the glass itself, because it creates a very cool shadow when you put it against the wall. So I've been messing around with that, and I've been painting on different, because all the frames are in different shapes and sizes, and I've been sort of altering the images based on, like, influenced by the shape of the frame. That's been recently what I've been most interested in, but I'm always doing just random commissions and random art things that come to my mind. And I also do a lot of writing and music as well, but that will never be found anywhere on the internet. So, yeah.
Well, that's okay. Maybe in the future. There's another question from Jennifer Mitchell. And she said, did you hear any feedback from Ruby Bridges or Kamala Harris after releasing the picture? Oh, that's interesting.
Ruby reposted it and thanked us, which was wild. Kamala, I don't know if, I'm sure I'm sure she's seen it, but I don't anticipate her ever really reaching out about it. But yeah, Ruby saying, and then this is something that I guess, I don't know, I can say, but my mom reached out to Ruby and asked for a autographed copy of her book. And so she actually signed one and gave that to me. And that was my Christmas gift. So I've heard from her in multiple ways, and I feel a little bit of like a heartstring to her at this point, but yeah, for sure.
Wow, that's so amazing that your work like went viral, I guess, and reached so many people, including the people that are in the image itself. So I'm sure you got this question a lot, but like, what was like the first time that you kind of realized the success of the image?
Yeah, I turn my phone off on the week. I try to turn my phone off on the weekends, just like for personal reasons, but I got a lot of texts Saturday morning, November 7th, and of people just saying, you're going viral. And at the time, because Gordon, my client at the time, he kept saying, like, throughout this whole process, he's like, oh, this is gonna go viral. And I was like, oh, okay, so we got maybe, I don't know, 100 likes or something. And I pulled up Instagram, we got a lot more than that. So that was the first really time that I realized it. But that day was so wild because I, in the process of just like processing and coming to terms with that, it was also November 7th was November 7th. And so I remember like watching Kamala's speech and her addressing the little girls and saying like, we applaud you every step of the way. And I was sobbing because like being a woman and being like the path to becoming a working artist. And I'm 1 year out of college right now. Like, I think a lot of people think I'm a lot older than I am, but I'm only 23. And so like, just like the challenges of empathy and vulnerability and being like going into professional life, the whole year was quite a bit on top of a pandemic and everything. And so I felt, yeah, I was sobbing at her speech, and just like I walked by, I live in San Francisco, I walked by the Dolores Park, and there were people like cheering and chanting and playing like all of all these anthems. I won't like go into what they said. I don't think they're G-rated, but I was like on a run and I was sobbing while I was running, which has never happened to me before. So it was quite an emotional day for me.
I'm sure it was.
For everyone.
Remember watching her speech. It was amazing. It's just, I'm so excited for them to go into office.
Yeah.
And just how historical it really is. Those are the questions I have for you prepared.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
Keely, I just want to bring in a comment. What a great conversation. Carolina Curran wanted to point out, well said, Bria, we need to dispel the myth that art is not a viable career or a separate realm from everyday life and other disciplines. I'm working on my BFA thesis right now and working with similar concepts to yours in terms of the power of art to connect people. I think this is really the big idea that we're focused on today, but also at the Norman Rockwell Museum, where every piece of illustration art is telling a story. And Bria, you're continuing in that remarkable tradition with your image. We're celebrating this incredible moment in time where we have the first vice president who is both a woman and of color. And so there are wonderful things to look forward to on this march toward a more equitable and just society.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
we have a question from Jennifer Mitchell. In the video, is the dress in the museum the actual dress that Ruby wore? And there's actually a great story around that. Yes, Norman Rockwell actually had 3 dresses made because he wasn't sure who the model was going to be. But one of those original dresses is in the museum. And we have one other question from Rochelle. How did Ruby change the way you see the world? Did she inspire you? And I would put this question to both of you young, wonderful artists who are making a mark already and will continue to do so, I'm sure. Keely, do you want to start?
Yes, and that question is from my mom. Well, I remember seeing that painting on one of my early trips to the museum with school in middle school. And I think I probably didn't understand the full meaning behind it until I got older in 8th grade. I remember my English teacher talking about the image. So I think it really, as I grew up to understand like the history of racism and how it's still affecting us now and all the work that's been done, I feel like seeing that image and learning about Ruby Bridges is just like something, I feel like a story that should be told more often. And I just kind of learned more about the importance of these small changes that, you know, become bigger.
Wonderful. I actually need to clarify one thing. The dress, I got carried away here. The dress that is in the video is not the dress that Ruby Bridges wore. It's the dress that the model of Ruby Bridges, who is Linda Gunn, the dress that was that Norman Rockwell used to make the image. So I'm sorry, I made a mistake there, but the Ruby Bridges painting is part of the Imagining Freedom exhibition, which is on view at the museum through today and will be a virtual exhibition available nationwide shortly. And Bria, how is Ruby inspired you?
Yeah, I mean, also growing up, seeing the image, I think what I read into it was just like courage and strength. I think that it's so difficult. Like, I am such an introvert. Like, being here was so scary for me. And so I put, like, literally, if I put myself in her shoes, walking with 4 police officers, like having crowds chant at you. I know she was young, and she said in interviews and everything, like, she didn't fully understand what was happening, but I think kids understand a lot. And I think she took in a lot. And that kind of like energy and hatred, and just like walking with, like I said, the tilt of a chin or like the strength of a stride, and being able to keep going was very remarkable to me. And so that's always been, I think, what inspired me, is just like, no matter how hard it is, no matter how much suffering it brings, just like keep walking. And then recently, a lot of her interviews also, I have been watching that she just says so much about her teacher too. Like, I was teaching for a while. I still do educational events here and there, but teachers are so important, and her teacher made her feel so comfortable in a school that otherwise would not have. And she said a lot of stuff about, like, it didn't matter if she was white. Like, it's not about your race. It's about who you are and how you treat people, and the advocates like can be advocates. And especially with this image, like, I feel so strange being a white woman and making this image, but I think having her obviously thanking us, and then being just encouraged in that, like, advocates matter on a lot of levels. Yeah, she has inspired me.
Yeah, advocates and allies. And I think we have a comment from Bonnie Blundell. Ruby was so brave, and so were her parents and her mother, who said, we're going to work on this together. It's just a remarkable story. We had a question about whether Norman Rockwell was in touch with Ruby's family. It was a national story, of course, that he was responding to a few years after the Brown versus Board of Education case. But Stephanie Plunkett, I wonder if you'd come on and just tell us what you know about that.
Oh, thank you very much. As far as we know, I don't believe Rockwell was in direct contact with Ruby or her family, though he was very struck by the events of her experience. And he typically would collect information that had been published, you know, whether in newspapers or magazines. And that was his way of researching. So
Stephanie, we know he was in touch with Robert Coles, the famous psychologist and Harvard professor who had a landmark course on social justice at Harvard.
Absolutely. And of course, Dr. Coles was very close to Ruby Bridges.
He was close, and he actually was the first person, I think, who wrote a wonderful book about her story.
Yes. Thank you. I'll just mention that book was called Dead End School, and Rockwell did do illustrations for Dr. Cole's book.
Was Ruby in a few of his books? I think he had a children's book also with her name on it.
Yes, I apologize. I think that's the one I was actually referring to. Thank you. Dead End School.
And I think if there's any other questions, we're getting close to the end of the program, but if there's anyone else who would like to ask a question, we have a couple of minutes. And we're just so happy everyone was here today. And Bria and Keely, you are both hugely inspirational, building on the top of very broad shoulders before you, and no doubt will go on to do great things. There is a question about curriculum. We do know, we would like everybody to know, if you go to nrm.org and look up the Learn section and the Curriculum Lab, we have wonderful curriculum materials, including materials about the problem we all live with, image and Ruby Bridges. So.
I just realized I sent that to the panelists, not everyone, but I don't know if they would be interested in. I also have published my own curriculum on my website, and it's about art and storytelling and empathy. Can I share that with them? Or
yes, please.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, cool.
And Keely, is there any last words of advice, especially for young people who are on the program today?
Advice for young people? I don't know, maybe just to keep educating yourself and keep speaking up, even if people tell you that you're too young or you don't know anything. That's not right, and you should keep, because I feel like as a young person, like the future is a long way for me. So it's what I have to look forward to, and I want to make it the best world possible for me and everyone. So that's why I work so hard to make it a better world. So everyone should keep doing that.
We completely agree. And so Robert Cole's book is The Story of Ruby Bridges. It's the name of the children's book. So we wanted to make sure people heard that. And I think that, was there another question, Stephanie, about the curriculum lab or the exhibition? I'm getting, the chat's been busy, so I'm.
Let's see, I haven't seen anything else, but as Mary says, there are materials for all grade levels on the curriculum lab, and essentially Norman Rockwell's entire body of work is represented there, but there's a lot of emphasis on really wonderful paintings like The Golden Rule, and of course The Problem We All Live With, and other civil rights images that might be helpful if you are working with students in a classroom. And Bria, I would love to hear about your curriculum. That sounds really amazing.
Yeah, it started as part of my undergraduate. I didn't just want to write a thesis to be read by academics. So I wanted to do something that was tangible as well. And so I converted all of the research into a curriculum that I taught to my fellow undergrads at the time, and then kept teaching as the years went on wherever I was teaching. So I adapted it for younger kids, and but it focuses on storytelling. It focuses on, for the undergraduates, identity, and then for the younger kids, sort of a sense of home and community. And it uses art as a way to get those stories in the open so that people, or kids and students, can talk to each other about the things that otherwise don't come up in school conversations. So like creating those bonds of connection in hopes of forming empathy and more well-rounded views of each other, which is sometimes super hard, especially when we don't talk. So
that's wonderful. So I have one more clarification on Robert Coles, who was an extremely prolific writer, and this is why it takes a team. So between Stephanie and I, and Lori Norton Moffat, who's also on the chat, he did two books that about Ruby Bridges. One was a children's book. And that was the story of Ruby Bridges, and it's wonderful. And then the second book is the book that Stephanie was referring to, called Dead End School, and that is a larger tome about inequities of race in schools. So,
and I just mentioned that the connection between them is that Dr. Coles was actually Ruby Bridges' psychotherapist or therapist, both for herself and for her family, as they were going through these incredibly trying times of being the first to integrate the William Franz Elementary School. So he was in a position to visit them on a very regular basis, sometimes more than once a week, to kind of share their experiences, to document what was going on. And he really did that with tremendous empathy.
I think that's a great point, Stephanie, and Robert Coles is just a giant, still living in Eastern Massachusetts. We have a great comment from Bonnie. I love how Ruby Bridges describes racism as a grown-up disease, that all children are born with open hearts to love everybody, no matter their color. And I think certainly Ruby has done so much for our country. There's another question here for you, Bria. How many total views did your image get? And is there a print distribution plan?
I have no idea how many views I got. I try to stay away from that stuff, but the prints are in the works. I think Good Trouble is selling some, but I'm not selling any at the moment.
Okay, very good. Well, Bonnie says about 18,000. I actually think it was more than that, possibly, but
I think that was maybe my post, but
okay.
I don't even know. People are sharing it, and like I don't even know. They're not tagging anyone, so I'm sure it's the internet is its own thing.
I know that our communications manager, who's on, Alyssa, pays attention to these things, and she might have a number for us, but in any case, we are so glad that you are here with us today, and we look forward to seeing both of you continue to make contributions, and really encourage all of you who are online today to explore our virtual programs, but also come visit us when you have a chance here in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. Thank you, everyone. It was great to be with you today.